Well, good afternoon. Sue, Renee and I actually, without great intention of flipping your entire program upside down, took the liberty of changing the program. And we did that because we realized that there was something important that we were about to overlook in this whole conversation, and that is our management of floodplains. And so I would like to focus on that. But before I get started on the topic of floodplains, I would like to share with you why I really care about what my good friend Mark Personius just said. And somewhere buried in his talk was a reference to this, but Mark is a very thoughtful, understated person, and so I'm going to drive the point home for you, Mark. And that is that, in 1950, New York City became the first city in the world to exceed a population of 10 million people. And it was about that time that this whole term megacities came about. It was followed shortly thereafter by Tokyo. In the mid-1970s, Mexico City joined the club as the third megacity, which reflected a point that Mark made. Our world population, the number of people on this globe, has increased from about 2 million in the 1930, to 3 million in 1960, to 7.5, nearly 8 million people today. There are currently 28 megacities around the globe, and geographers estimate that Asia alone will have 30 megacities by the year 2050. Now, as the Public Works Director of Whatcom County, you might think I find that exciting. All of that concrete, roads to build, people to transport, but in fact, I find it pretty scary. And there's a statistic that came out of this whole research that I did. 25 tons of concrete per person per year is what this world produces. That alone contributes 10 to 15% of CO2 pollution to our atmosphere, and that concrete is going to go somewhere. The good news is that Ferndale is not going to be a megacity anytime soon. Neither is Bellingham or Nooksack or Everson or any of the other cities in Whatcom County, but it does sort of lend credibility to this whole question about what we expect out of our landscape going forward. That brings me to the slide that's before you now. And Erica Strobel mentioned the connection that the Nooksack River makes as it ribbons its way through Whatcom County, its tributaries, its fingers into our community. And I think that the downstream looking up view that you see before you today sort of puts some perspective on what that actually means. That is, you can see from this aerial photograph the areas of our county from Ferndale south that are already covered in concrete. Those areas that are being cropped currently. You can see part of the Levee Reservation and be reminded of the relationship between that community and the fishing resource. You can see part of their shellfish growing operation. And it's really about managing that landscape so that, of course, we can benefit all of those resources and all of those interests going forward. Whatcom County, you've seen already a number of ways that Whatcom County and other local tribal governments touch our interface with these ecosystems that we're talking about today. And one other way that Whatcom County is involved in that is in managing the floodplains from a standpoint of reducing the impact of our regular flooding that occurs in the Nooksack River Basin, and by using that as a mechanism to access some of these ecosystem improvements that Ned was bringing to our attention in his talk earlier. Our river is managed by the county under the auspices of a flood control zone district, which is a county-wide taxing authority that brings in revenues from all of us for the purpose of managing the floodplains, maintaining and improving the system of levees and dikes up and down the river, and doing other assorted and related work around that system. And the day-to-day maintenance of that system of levees and revetments and the like is accomplished through a number of local districts, diking districts, and subzones that appear on this aerial map of the county. And it's in the context of this management of these levees and dikes and revetments that the opportunity for basically a triple bottom line approach to managing floodplains comes about. And that is, if we do our work right, we can reduce the risk of flooding that flooding imposes on our community. We can provide economic stability for those businesses and those people who are affected by recurrent flooding, and at the same time, we can improve habitat for fish and all of the other freshwater biota that support the fish and those macro species. So what I would like to do today is just show you graphically what that looks like on the ground, what we consider success when we think about making that triple bottom line work in practice. 4 years ago, after quite a number of years of work in design, John Thompson, who's our premier salmon recovery expert in the Natural Resources Group in the Public Works Department at the county, with Gary Stoika, his boss, and Paula Cooper, who's the flood engineer, successfully took what was historically a flood-prone section of Canyon Creek that wiped out the Logs Resort some number of years back, and in the way of doing business back in those days, the result of the fix was to build a great big levee that was pushed right up against Canyon Creek that exacerbated what was already a difficult section of creek for salmon to traverse out of the Nooksack River and upstream. And through years of work and consultation with the tribes and the local community, and ginning up support from the state agencies that fund these kinds of projects, they were able to leverage money from the Flood Control Zone District to recreate, to set this levee back, recreate a nearly natural operating floodplain, reduce the flood risk for the people in the Glacier Springs community who live behind this levee, and create an opportunity for stabilizing what was a perpetual maintenance problem. And this is what the Canyon Creek project looked like a year after it had been planted, or excuse me, a year after the work had been done, and then 2 years on, this was, I believe, last year, looked something like this. So a project that has lowered the burden of cost for the taxpayers, because the maintenance of this facility is now less. It has improved safety for the people who live behind this levee, and it has improved the condition for salmon. So this particular, I should have actually pointed out on the map, this particular project was way upriver. So the far right side of this graph, where the river is fairly steep, where there isn't a huge fear of the types of typical floods you think about when you think about the Nooksack River flooding, but rather more prone to severe pressure on the banks and avulsion, and the river jumping very quickly and what am I trying to say? In any case, very quickly into a new channel, and of course that's where the that's where the concern comes. My next example is going to be a little further downstream. Can you see the arrow up there? Right down here around Deming. This is a project that Paula Cooper or Paula Harris has under construction now. I'm then going to jump down to the project that Jon and Rich Apple are collaborating with Public Works on downstream, and then show you something down here just near the Lummi Reservation on Slater Road. So from Canyon Creek, we move downstream to Deming. There's a section of the Deming Levee, the existing Deming Levee upstream, that has never been brought up to 100-year flood standard. It hasn't been brought up to standard in the past because of issues associated with its proximity to the railroad and the fact that there's a wetland, a stream that drains behind the levee, which is something one doesn't want to begin with. That has been difficult to sort out a decent approach to fixing that problem. This project is underway now and has resulted in relationships with all of the stakeholders upstream, with the railroad and the like, that has now channeled that water out of a stagnant sort of wetland-like thing into a functioning habitat that can be accessed, that will drain that water through fish habitat through a culvert that has that's fish friendly and into the river. So another example of the benefits I talked about earlier. Some more photographs of the Deming tributary reconnection. Moving down to the project that Mr. Apple referred to earlier this morning. This is a section of river that has seen recurrent overtopping, had undersized culverts stacked on top of each other right next to Mr. Apple's field. The recurring flooding caused economic losses for the farmer, simply because he couldn't get on his field early enough, and if he did, the likelihood of having all of that work undone with one simple flood. Also the problem of trapping fish upstream, and Rich mentioned some of those issues and solutions earlier today. This is also a project that's currently underway, funded by your taxpayer money for that triple bottom line, and managed and implemented by the Public Works River and Flood Group. And it's not only this flood control zone district that is on this pathway to integrating ecosystem benefit into its everyday work. This picture is of a bridge that is being built on Slater Road. 2 years ago, it came to the attention of the Public Works Department that the culvert that was undersized, because it was a vestige of the old way of doing business that was some 30 feet beneath the surface of the roadway, was failing. And the question was, what do we do with this situation that was day by day by day over the course of the last two record rainfall winters? What do we do to prevent this from failing? And then ultimately, what do we do to make sure that we maintain the transportation system in a manner that we can continue to move trucks out to Cherry Point, up and down this major thoroughfare, this major arterial, and at the same time remove this blockage and open a section of creek that hadn't otherwise been open for or readily open for fish to move. And the result of that was the selection of a new bridge as the best solution. And when the engineers went back and value engineered the alternatives that included a couple of different new culvert scenarios and this new bridge scenario, what they learned was the maintenance costs associated with a new bridge resulted in a 20-year cost, over the course of 20 years, a cost savings that would be borne by the taxpayers. And so as a result of that and the other mutual benefits associated with this project, the County Council selected the bridge as a $5.5 million bridge as a solution of choice. That project is also getting wrapped up this month, and we've got to get the culvert out and the channel restored by the end of this month, which, by the way, is the fish window. So from a construction standpoint, that's the dread, is passing the fish window. In any case, those are the examples that I have about the approach that we are taking in Public Works across the board to try and leverage the work that we do every day into benefits not only for the community, for the businesses that we rely on, but also for this natural ecosystem that we recognize we want to maintain for future generations, not under the specter of exponential population growth and paving the world, but rather one that we know can function in a way that will reduce the risks for us and our future generations. Go.
I'm Renee LaCroix. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director for the City of Bellingham, and I head up the Natural Resources Division. John and I had talked about doing a joint presentation about stormwater, and I made some smart-ass comments about maybe doing an interpretive dance instead. John laughed and told me we weren't going to do this combined presentations anymore. A somewhat true story. So John did a fabulous job of talking about quantity and how stormwater runoff affects quantity, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the quality aspect of that. So for when we think about stormwater runoff, we obviously realize there's flooding impacts. The other thing that happens when we have a lot of rain come down is that rain goes through the watershed and picks up all the pollutants in the watershed and brings them into our water bodies, our lakes, streams, and bays. And the common pollutants that you hear about are sediment, animal feces, nutrients, auto fluids, plastics, trash, heavy metals, soaps and cleaners, and fertilizers. Why do we care about this? We care about this because the pollutants that enter our water bodies affect our drinking water quality, they affect our habitat, they affect our stream water quality, the water quality of our lakes and bays. With that comes economic consequences, lost economic opportunities in terms of fishing, and lost opportunities for quality of life in terms of recreation and culture. So the City of Bellingham has had a proactive stormwater management program for the last 25 years. The actual utility was created in 2001, and that utility brings in about $7 million a year from which we fund our stormwater program. And that excludes any grants and loans that we're able to bring in. The utility funds capital projects, maintenance and operations, public education and outreach, and then planning, regulatory compliance, and restoration projects. We got our first NPDES permit in 2007. We're a Phase 2 community, so NPDES stands for National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. So that is the permit that we received from Department of Ecology that sets out what the requirements are for our stormwater program. And the permit and the program has 5 elements. One is the public education and outreach, and with the City of Bellingham, we have a great staff that does educational campaigns related to the We Scoop Pet Waste campaign. As you heard from Erica, that's something that we can all be doing to increase or decrease the amount of bacteria in our waterways. We have the Wash Right outdoor washing campaign, the Don't Drip and Drive vehicle campaign, and the newly rebranded Bellingham Water School, where we take about 1,000 fifth graders through our water and wastewater treatment plants annually. And we also have a lot of stormwater information that's given to those fifth graders. The second requirement is a public involvement and participation. So just making sure that the public has the opportunity to weigh in on how that money is spent. We do that through multiple opportunities where we are reaching out to neighborhood groups or issuing surveys where we're asking for feedback. We have a lot of focus groups on our individual programs where we're asking people to weigh in on a more detailed level. And we also have our city council meetings that are always open for public comment and opportunities when we provide updates to our city council that the public can hear what's going on and also have a public comment session during the city council meetings. We have our illicit discharge detection and elimination program. And there's multiple ways that the city meets this requirement. The stormwater hotline is probably the one you hear the most about. So if somebody's out in the community and they see something that they think, oh, that doesn't look like it should be going down the storm drain, or their neighbor is actively dumping paint cans down the storm drain, there's a number you can call. We'll send an inspector out to look at the situation. And last year, in 2016, our staff responded to 264 incidents. So it's in my opinion, one of our unsung programs, because it's an opportunity to meet the possible pollutant issue at its source and reach out to people on a one-to-one basis and say, this is what you're doing, this is why it's not good, here's what you could do differently. So it's where the rubber hits the road. The fourth requirement is to control runoff from development. So in 2016, city staff reviewed 578 site plans that ranged from 300 square feet in size to over an acre for development and redevelopment. And the city regulations are somewhat unique in that our redevelopment standards for stormwater are the same as our development standards. And so as areas of town redevelop, it's an opportunity to get a net gain beyond what was there and permitted before we had a lot of the requirements that we have now. And our stormwater inspectors provided over 8,000 inspections to different places around town as they were undergoing development. And then also that includes our private facility inspection. I have 5 minutes left? Seriously? Okay, now comes the dance. Maintenance and operations. We have 702 stormwater facilities that we maintain annually. We sweep our streets every 2 to 3 months. We have updated our code numerous times over the last 5 to 10 years. The latest was in 2017, where we updated for low-impact developments and low-impact development. So we're making low-impact development the preferred approach in our stormwater management program, and people must use LID to the maximum extent feasible. In addition to what's required under our NPDES program, we have a lot of voluntary things that we do that I think make the city of Bellingham a great place to live. We have our local source control program, where we have 2 part-time staff people that go out to businesses. And I'm going to talk through each of these a little bit more. So that's the overview of what I'm about to talk about. In the interest of time, we're going to just go right to the next slide. So in the local source control program, we have staff that go out to businesses, and they divide it into waste sectors, so they tackle different waste sectors at different times. They've done dentists and automotive fix-it shops. Our next sector is going to look at assisted living and look at how they deal with a lot of the pharmaceutical waste and a lot of the waste that gets manufactured in assisted living facilities. In 2016, they did 149 site visits, and that's all voluntary. We have a voluntary pharmaceutical take-back program. 13,000 pounds of pharmaceuticals have been diverted from the waste stream since 2010, so we're working with local pharmacies and the police department to provide safe drop-off locations. We have large capital retrofit projects. So these are areas of town that are not required to be treated for stormwater because they were developed prior to our existing stormwater regulations. The city has actively pursued grants and loans from the Department of Ecology and has been very fortunate to receive quite a bit of funding through their programs. This is the Fairhaven area of town, and the yellow area indicates the 90 acres that we recently retrofit with a water quality facility right at the mouth of Padden Estuary, or Padden Creek, where it drains into Padden Estuary. It treats about 42 million gallons per year. We estimate at this point it's going to go remove 12 tons of suspended solids, 80 pounds of phosphorus, 60 pounds of zinc, 1 pound of copper, and 9 tons of hydrocarbons. This is the same type of project. It's in the Columbian neighborhood. It's a retrofit to a previously developed area. It treats 88 acres using 10 rain gardens and 3 different filter vaults, and it reduces pollutants from entering into our marine waterways. Some of the other voluntary projects that we've implemented in the last couple of years, the Padden Creek daylighting. So this is Padden Creek before. They went through a 1/4 mile underground tunnel for 100 years, and it blocked fish passage. This is what it looks like after. We worked with DOT to replace that bridge. It's their bridge, and then the city came along and daylighted the project itself. 2,300 linear feet of stream that's now accessible. This is a project that we're going to have in hopefully 2018 if the state capital budget moves along quickly, where we're going to create a 1.2-acre estuary. And this is near the Nooksack River is on the left, Bellingham Technical College is on your right. The 1.2-acre estuary replaces historic salt marsh that was in there, and then along the shoreline in the very faint orange, we're going to provide 1,300 lineal feet of beach nourishment for forage fish spawning as well. The Middle Fork Nooksack project, you've probably heard about this a lot over the years. This project's been in the work for 16, 17 years. The city's water intake for our water supply system comes off the middle fork of the the middle fork of the Nooksack, and this is the diversion structure looking upstream. We have recently been contacted by American Rivers. They reached out to us and they said they had a private funder who wanted to be involved in this project. So just last Monday, we took this to council and signed a contract with American Rivers. They're providing $2.9 million to do design and permitting and some of the construction for this project. We're hoping to go to construction in 2019, maybe 2020. The project would keep the intake structure that's on the right part of the screen, and then the diversion dam itself, we're going to remove as much of that as is possible, with the goal of providing fish passage to 26 miles of upstream habitat, and still maintaining the city's water supply intake. And American Rivers also hired 2 staff to manage this project and help fund it, because it's a $16 to $18 million project, all said and done. So there's a lot of money that we still need to gather together. And the two folks that they hired are in the room today, and you will meet them hopefully as this project moves forward. The city also does monitoring and beach seining. So this is a shot where we contracted with the Skagit River Systems Cooperative to look at juvenile fish use in the marine nearshore. You'll hear about that tomorrow when Eric Beamer does his talk. And then we're also in the process of updating our climate action plan. And so in the next few months, we'll be taking that to council, and you'll hear more about it. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip through those.
Yes, question for Renee. You mentioned some interesting statistics with respect to the value of your retrofits and the like, and I'm just wondering how you're developing that information and whether you're getting it out enough so the taxpayers see the value that comes from those projects.
So I just want to make sure I understand, how are we developing the numbers that you saw up here in terms of how much it treats and pounds of phosphorus removed?
Yeah, I work on the Puget Sound Ecosystem Monitoring Panel, and the interest is in monitoring that demonstrates results from actions. So this isn't empirical data. This isn't post-project actual monitoring on the outfalls. This is the pre-project design, how the engineers run the numbers, and they tell us this is what we think it's going to do. I guess, are there plans to monitor the changes at key points to show the accumulated benefits from all of the actions that are being taken?
Not at this time, but I think that's something that we should look at in the future.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jon, since he brought up floodplain management, and I'm actually glad you made the switch. Although we don't have hurricanes here, we've certainly gotten a great opportunity to see the importance of managing our floodplains. And so my question is, we expect more intense rainfalls in the winter period. Do we know what that is going to mean for water in our floodplains?
That is a very good question, and to an extent, the answer to your question is yes. We have some idea about what to expect coming down the pike in the way of increased spring freshets and those sorts of things, and generally what the implication is for the flood regime. In a more detailed way, the River and Flood group in the Public Works Department has undertaken, in collaboration with Western Washington University, there was a master's thesis that looked at some of that and sort of established the basis on which to build those answers to those questions into the longer term planning for managing the floodplain. I was actually having this conversation with the floodplain manager, Paula Harris, a little bit before I came up here, and you know, her observation was that that we're lucky because the way our flood system, our river system works, it's set up to be an overtopping system, which gives quite a bit of relief to those kinds of changes in river flows. So where some systems that are fully constrained might see more acute changes in flooding, for us, those will be mitigated by the fact that we have these overtopping systems. That doesn't mean, though, that we don't need to go back and have a good hard look as more information comes available about whether or not our current flood management regime can accommodate those future flows sort of in specified locations. And the good news about that is that that program is getting ready to start an update to its comprehensive flood management program that was last updated in 1999, and we will be starting that process going down the road. And there's I don't know, about 14 members of the Flood Control Zone District Advisory Committee that represent both sort of land users and also subject matter experts who will be participating with a band of consultants in putting that analysis together. And that looks at everything from, you know, the impacts of climate change to how much success we're having in terms of integrating fish and flood and the whole 9 yards. So that process is getting underway, and you will be hearing more about that.
So this is a question for, I guess, all the agency folks. And I guess I'm wondering, between the city and the county and among the different agencies, are there mechanisms that you have to ensure that all the great stuff that you guys talked about aren't being undermined by other actions? So, you know, the sort of case I have in my head is Squalicum Creek, where there's lots of great restoration work going on, but then at the same time, there's been development permitted in the floodplain just downstream of that restoration. And so I'm wondering, what mechanisms are there out there to prevent those sort of counterproductive development pressure?
So I think the city gets to take credit for both those, the Squalicum Creek restoration and the downstream development. And on behalf of the city, I apologize for the latter. That was permitted under our old regulations, and it sat for years, and so now it's actually going in. We have worked very closely with the developers on all sides of the Squalicum Creek reroute project to work with them. The Allsop development, as an example, as part of their development, they actually gave an easement to the city to have the creek reroute go on it. And then we worked with Talbot upstream of that and ended up purchasing quite a bit of land to make the reroute happen. So there were extremely good examples of us working well, but then there's always the problem, in my opinion, in this case, was a problem of previous vesting rights.